unplug my microphone and see if that's better this time, is it? Is that better now? Audio now? Yes? No? What do you reckon? I might as well use my... is that better? Audio's good. Okay. Audio's working. It's this damn microphone. It's this damn microphone that doesn't work properly. That's what it is. That's what the problem is. I'm back. Yes, I am. Okay. What is YouTube name? I put it in the title of the broadcast. It's Andrew A9630. And for YouTube viewers, my Periscope name is just at A9630. So it should be working. It should be working. I think that's acceptable. Okay, right. So Silas Marner. We'll get on with reading Silas Marner, shall we? And hopefully next time I'll remember how to actually switch on the YouTube streaming. And by the way, both of you, YouTube and Periscope, how is the signal? Because I've got you both using the same stream, of course. So let me know what the signal's like on either platform, if you wish. Right, so we were on chapter 2. We're on chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2. Even people whose lives have been made various by learning sometimes find it hard to keep a fast hold on their habitual views of life, on their faith in the invisible, nay, on the sense that their past joys and sorrows are a real experience. When they are suddenly transported to a new land, where beings around them know nothing of their history and share none of their ideas, where their Mother Earth shows another lap, and human life has other forms than those on which their souls have been nourished. Signal's perfect. Good. Made a screenshot. Okay. Is the signal perfect for YouTube? Is anybody watching on both Periscope and YouTube? Anyone doing that? Hopefully. But even their experience may hardly enable them thoroughly to imagine what was the effect on a simple weaver like Silas Marner. You're on both, lad. Good stuff. And when he left his own country and people, he came to settle in Ravello. Nothing could be more unlike his native town, set within sight of the widespread hillsides than this low wooded region where he felt hidden even from the heavens by the screening trees and hedgerows. There was nothing here when he rose in the deep morning quiet and looked out on the dewy brambles and rank tufted grass that seemed to have any relation with that life centering in Lantern Yard, which had once been to him the altar place of high dispensations. I would do that, yes. I definitely would do that. You could be on both, but later on YouTube, okay. It's very confusing having two sets of comments, I can tell you. That is very confusing. But I'll see if we can get used to it. The whitewashed walls, the little pews where well-known figures entered with a subdued rustling, and where first one well-known voice and then another, pitched in a peculiar key of petition, uttered phrases at once occult and familiar, like the amulet worn on the heart. The pulpit where the minister delivered unquestioned doctrine, and swayed to and fro, and handled the book in a long accustomed manner. The very pauses between the couplets of the hymn as it was given out and their current swell of voices in song, these things had been the channel of divine influences to Marner. They were the fostering home of his religious emotions. They were Christianity and God's kingdom upon earth. A weaver who finds hard words in his hymn book knows nothing of abstractions, as the little child knows nothing of parental love, but only knows one face and one lap to which it stretches its arms for refuge and nurture. Thank you for those super hearts. Who's the author? George Eliot. Hard to keep up with me on two platforms. Yes, I'm sure it is George Eliot. Don't always drink water. I have some water. So again, let me just welcome anybody else who is watching on replay. I suppose replay. What is it properly on YouTube? What's it called when you're not watching live? Clean lady, yeah, that'll be my fan. Yes, I've got I have my phone set up right beside the fan on my laptop. Am I eating green vegetables? Not right now. And what could be more unlike that lantern yard world than the world in Raveloe? Orchards looking lazy with neglected plenty, the large church and the wide churchyard where men gazed at lounging at their own doors in service time, the purple-faced farmers jogging along the lanes or turning in at the Rainbow. Now that's interesting, using the word jogging in a book written at that time. Interesting. Jogging along the lanes or turning in at the Rainbow, homesteads where men supped heavily and slept in the light of the evening hearth, and where women seemed to be laying up a stock of linen for the life to come. There were no lips in Raveloe from which a word could fall that would stir Silas Marner's benumbed faith to a sense of pain. In the early ages of the world, we know, it was believed that each territory was inhabited and ruled by its own divinities, so that a man could cross the bordering heights and be out of reach of his native gods, whose presence was confined to the streams and the groves and the hills among which he lived from his birth. And poor Silas was vaguely conscious of something not unlike the feeling of primitive men when they fled thus, in fear or in sullenness, from the face of an unpropitious deity. Everything's still all right? Everything's still in full effect? It's not the case. Sometime. Everything's still acceptable. Hello, Patricia. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the second chapter. There's a few pages of the second chapter. We'll see how long it takes, shall we? We'll see how long it takes. Where did I get to? That page, and it was from his birth. And poor Silas, vaguely conscious of something not unlike the feeling. Oh, I really read that. It seemed to him that the power in which he had vainly trusted among the streets and in the prayer meetings was very far away from this land in which he had taken refuge, where men lived in careless abundance, knowing and needing nothing of that trust, which for him had been turned to bitterness. The little light he possessed spread its beams so narrowly that frustrated belief was a curtain broad enough to create for him the blackness of night. Fan's like, shall I, in that case, if the fan's too loud, shall I move you to the other side? I'll put you to the other side, which means moving my laptop a little bit. Right, is that better? Is that better? You won't be affected. You can just sit there and enjoy it. You'll be fine. Don't worry about those Periscope people. They know nothing about high quality reading and stuff. Isn't that right? Better? Good. Okay. Right. His first movement, after the shock, had been to work in his loom, and when he went on with this unremittingly, never asking himself why, now he was come to Raveloe, he worked far on into the night to finish the tale of Mrs. Odgood's table linen sooner than she had expected, without contemplating beforehand the money she would put in his hand for the work. He seemed to weave like the spider, from pure impulse, without reflection. Every man's work, pursued steadily, tends in this way to become an end in itself, and so to bridge over the loveless chasms of his life. Silas's hand satisfied itself with throwing the shuttle, and his eye with seeing the little squares of cloth complete themselves under his effort. Then there were the calls of hunger, and Silas, in his solitude, had to provide his own breakfast, dinner, and supper, to fetch his own water from the well, and put his own kettle on the fire. And all those immediate promptings helped, along with the weaving, to reduce his life to the unquestioning activity of a spinning insect. He hated the thought of the past. There was nothing that called out his love and fellowship towards the strangers he had come amongst, and the future was all dark, for there was no unseen love that cared for him. Thought was arrested by utter bewilderment. Now its old narrow pathway was closed, and affection seemed to have died under the bruise that had fallen on its keenest nerves. The paragraphs in this, incidentally, are much longer than I'm used to reading. When I'm reading out loud, these are much longer than Wuthering Heights. You like bearded Andrew, do you? Okay, okay. It's speaking too quietly. His accent is clear to me. Is that I'm speaking quietly? I'm speaking at a normal volume. If my microphone worked, that'd be better, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? That's your fault, YouTube. Okay. But at last, Mrs. Odgood's table linen was finished, and Silas was paid in gold. The problem with doing this on my laptop is things keep popping up on the screen, unfortunately. I have to clear them off. Paid in gold. His earnings in his native town, where he worked for a wholesale dealer, had been after a lower rate. He'd been paid weekly, and of all his weekly earnings, a large proportion had gone to objects of piety and charity. Oh, Mrs. Odgood's all right one, she is, yes. Now, for the first time in his life, he had 5 bright guineas put into his hand. No man expected a share of them, and he loved no man that he should offer him a share. But what were the guineas to him, who saw no vista beyond countless days of weaving? It was needless for him to ask that, for it was pleasant to him to feel them in his palm and look at their bright faces, which were all his own. It was another element of his life, like the weaving and the satisfaction of hunger, subsisting quite aloof from the life of belief and love from which he had been cut off. The weaver's hand had known the touch of hard-won money even before the palm had grown to its full breadth for 20 years. Mysterious money had stood to him as the symbol of earthly good and the immediate object of toil. He had seemed to love it little in the years when every penny had its purpose for him, for he loved the purpose then. But now, when all purpose was gone, that habit of looking towards the money and grasping it with a sense of fulfilled effort made a loam that was deep enough for the seeds of desire. And as Silas walked homewards from the fields in the twilight, he drew out the money and thought it was brighter in the gathering gloom. What do I reckon so far? I like the way this is written. I like the way this is written. I like the writing of this. Hello, Simon. Hello. About this time, an incident happened. Is that Simon who I know from Periscope? You have the flu. You find it comforting. Oh, sorry, you have the flu. About this time, an incident happened which seemed to open a possibility of some fellowship with his neighbours. One day, taking a pair of shoes to be mended, he saw the cobbler's wife seated by the fire, suffering from the terrible symptoms of heart disease and dropsy, which he had witnessed as the precursors of his mother's death. I do this live on YouTube, isn't it? He felt a rush of pity at the mingled sight and remembrance, and recalled the relief of his mother had found from a simple preparation of foxglove. He promised Sally Oates to bring her something that would ease her, since the doctor did her no good. As we know, don't we, Periscope? As we know from my videos on Periscope, foxglove was discovered to be helpful for heart disease. By somebody who lived about 6 miles away from here. I wish I could remember his name now. Okay. But yeah, so that would have been, I think, about 50 or 60 years before this was written. I think. Something like that, late 1700s. I could be talking out of my hat, but you never know. In this office of clarity, Silas felt for the first time since he had come to Raveloe a sense of unity between his past and present life, which must have been the beginning of his rescue from the insect-like existence into which his nature had shrunk. But Sally Oates's disease had raised her into personages of much interest and importance among neighbours, and the fact of her having found relief from drinking Silas Marner's stuff became a matter of general discourse. When Dr. Kimball gave physic, it was natural that it should have an effect, but when a weaver who came from nobody knew where worked wonders with a brown bottle of waters, the occult character of the process was evident. TPA. Such a sort of thing had not been known since the wise woman at Tarley had died, and she had charms as well as stuff. Everybody went to her when their children had fits. Silas Marner must be a person of the same sort, for how did he know what would bring back Sally Oates's breath if he didn't know a fine sight more than that? The wise woman had words that she muttered to herself so that you couldn't hear what they were. And if she tied a bit of red thread about the child's toe the while, it would keep off the water in his head. There were women in Raveloe at the present time who had worn one of the wise woman's little bags round their necks, and in consequence had never had an idiot child, as Aunt Coulter had. Silas Marner could very likely do as much and more, and now it was all clear how he should have come from unknown parts and be so comical looking. Always the weaver is into the occult episode. Hang on, where to get it? But Sally Oates must mind and not tell the doctor, for he would be sure to set his face against Marner. He was always angry about the wise woman, and used to threaten those who went to her that they should have none of his help anymore. Silas would now find himself and his cottage suddenly beset by mothers who wanted him to charm away the whooping cough or bring back the milk, and by men who wanted stuff against the rheumatics or the knots in the hands, and to secure themselves against a refusal. The applicants brought silver in their palms. Silas might have driven a profitable trade in charms as well as in his small list of drugs, but money on this condition was no temptation to him. He had never known an impulse towards falsity, and he drove one away after another with growing irritation, for the news of him as a wise man had spread even to Tarley, and it was long before people ceased to take long walks for the sake of asking his aid. But the hope in his wisdom was at length changed into dread, for no one believed him when he said he had no charms and could not work cures, and every man and woman who had accident or a new attack after applying to him set the misfortune down to Master Marner's ill will and irritated glances. Thus it came to pass that his movement of pity towards Sally Oates, which had given him a transient sense of brotherhood, heightened the repulsion between him and his neighbours, and made his isolation more complete. Gradually the guineas, the crowns, and the half-crowns grew to a heap, and Marner drew less and less for his own wants, trying to solve the problem of keeping himself strong enough to work 16 hours a day on as small an outlay as possible. Have not men shut up in solitary imprisonment found an interest in marking the movements by straight strokes of a certain length on the wall until the growth of the sum of straight strokes arranged in triangles has become a mastering purpose? Well, that is exactly. A mastering purpose. Do we not while away moments of inanity or fatigued waiting by repeating some trivial movement or sound until the repetition has bred a want, which is incipient habit? That will help us to understand how the love of accumulating money grows an absorbing passion in men whose imaginations, even in the very beginning of their hoard, show them no purpose beyond it. Marner wanted the heaps of 10 to grow into a square, and then into a larger square, and every added guinea, while it was itself a satisfaction, bred a new desire. In this strange world, made a hopeless riddle to him, he might, if he had had a less intense nature, have sat weaving, looking towards the end of his pattern or towards the end of his web till he forgot the riddle and everything else but his immediate sensations. But the money had come to mark off his weaving into periods, and the money not only grew, but it remained with him. He began to think it was conscious of him as his loom was, and he would on no account have exchanged these coins which had become his familiars for other coins with unknown faces. He handled them, he counted them, till their form and colour were like the satisfaction of a thirst to him. But it was only in the night, when his work was done, that he drew them out to enjoy their companionship. He had taken up some bricks in his floor underneath his loom, and here he had made a hole in which he set the iron pot that contained his guineas and silver coins, covering the bricks with sand whenever he replaced them. Not that the idea of being robbed was presented itself often or strongly to his mind. Hoarding was common in country districts in those days. There were old labourers in the parish of Raveloe who were known to have their savings by them, probably inside their flock beds. But their rustic neighbours, though not all of them as honest as their ancestors in the days of King Alfred, had not imagination bold enough to lay a plan of burglary. How could they have spent the money in their own village without betraying themselves? They would be obliged to run away, a course as dark and dubious as a balloon journey. Again, that's new technology, isn't it, in the 1850s, balloon journeys. Unless it was just a released, not a hot air balloon, but just a released. Mind you, there'd be no helium or hydrogen or whatever there. So, year after year, Silas Marner had lived in this solitude, his guineas rising in the iron pot, and his life narrowing and hardening itself more and more into a mere pulsation of desire and satisfaction that had no relation to any other being. His life had reduced itself to the mere functions of weaving and hoarding, without any contemplation of an end towards which the functions tended. The same sort of process has perhaps been undergone by wiser men when they have been cut off from faith and love, only instead of a loom and a heap of guineas, they have some erudite research, some ingenious project, or some well-knit theory. Strangely, Marner's face and figure shrank and bent themselves into a constant mechanical relation to the objects of his life, so that he produced the same sort of impression as a handle or a crooked tube, which has no meaning standing apart. The prominent eyes that used to look trusting and dreamy now looked as if they had been made to see only one kind of thing that was very small, like tiny grain for which they hunted everywhere, and he was so withered and yellow that, though he was not yet 40, the children always called him Old Master Marner. Yet, even in this stage of withering, a little incident happened which showed that the sap of affection was not all gone. It was one of his daily tasks to fetch his water from a well a couple of fields off, and for this purpose, ever since he came to Raveloe, he had had a brown earthenware pot, which he held as his most precious utensil among the very few conveniences he had granted himself. It had been his companion for 12 years, always standing on the same spot, always lending its handle to him in the early morning, so that its form had an expression for him of willing helpfulness, and the impress of its handle in his palm gave a satisfaction mingled with that of having the fresh, clear water. One day, as he was returning from the well, he stumbled against the top of the stile, and his brown pot, falling with such force against the stones that overarched the ditch below him, was broken in 3 pieces. Silas picked up the pieces and carried them home with grief in his heart. The brown pot could never be of use to him anymore, and he stuck the bits together and propped the ruin in its own place as a memorial. This is the history of Silas Marner until the 15th year after he came to Raveloe. The livelong day he sat in his loom, his ear filled with his monotony. His eyes bent close down on the slow growth of sameness in the brownish web. His muscles moved with such even repetition that their pause seemed almost as much a constraint as the holding of his breath. But at night came his revelry. At night he closed the shutters and made fast his doors and drew out his gold. Long ago the heap of coins had become too large for the iron pot to hold them, and he had made for them 2 thick leather bags. Thank you. Like leather bags, which wasted no room in their resting place, but let themselves flexibly to every corner. How the guineas shone as they came pouring out of the dark leather mouths! The silver bore no large proportion in amount to the gold, because the long pieces of linen which formed his chief work were always partly paid for in gold, and out of the silver he supplied his own bodily wants, choosing always the shillings and sixpences to spend in this way. He loved the guineas the best. He would not change the silver. The crowns and half-crowns were his own earnings, begotten by his labour. He loved them all. He spread them out in heaps and bathed his hands in them. Then he counted them and set them up in regular piles, and felt their rounded outline between his thumb and fingers, and thought fondly of the guineas that were only half earned by the work in his loom, as if they had been unborn children. The thought of the guineas that were coming slowly through the coming years, through all his life which spread far away before him, the end quite hidden by countless days of weaving. No wonder his thoughts were still with his loom and his money when he made his journeys through the fields and the lanes to fetch and carry home his work, so that his steps never wandered to the hedge banks and the lane side in search of the once familiar herbs. These too belonged in the past, from which his life had shrunk away, like a rivulet that has sunk far down from the grassy fringe of its old breath, and its little shivering thread that cuts a groove for itself in the barren sand. But about Christmas of the 15th year, a second great change came over Marner's life, and his history became blent in a singular manner with the life of his neighbours. End of chapter 2. Goodness, Silas Marner has changed so much from the start of chapter 1, hasn't he? Time has moved so fast as well. So incidentally, for the benefit of Periscope viewers, Marner was wrongly accused of theft when he was young. At the start of the book, we believe he was betrayed by his friend, and he framed him for theft, and then married his girlfriend because his girlfriend believed, along with everybody else where he lived, that he had stolen it because of a kind of a religious trial. That it was basically just a kind of a fortune telling sort of thing, but everybody believed it because that was the tradition, their religious tradition. So his girlfriend married the person who had, we think, framed Silas, and he was sent away. That was the punishment. He was cast out, and he's gone to live here in Raveloe as a stranger. So that's just a little recap. Sorry for having to do that, YouTube, but you know, that's what they're like. They've got no culture, no history, no idea of what's going on. You're lovely, Periscope. Absolutely adorable. Obviously, you're my true first love. That's, you know, I'm catching you up there because I want you to be so engaged in the story as much as I am. Right. I think that'll do on YouTube. We'll end the stream there, and we'll see what it's like. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time, YouTube. Are you sure you want to end the stream? Yes, I am. And goodbye.